Hello and welcome to the Berean Voice. I'm Randy Seaver. I'd like to respond to a video that Dr. Leighton Flowers made today in response to a video that I made yesterday, which was intended to be sarcastic and satirical. And he, unlike some others, took the bait and decided that he'd make a video that lasted over 2 hours, I think. I didn't even have time to finish watching everything he had to say. They accused me of not doing my homework because I hadn't listened to everything Dr. Flowers has ever said on video or everything he's ever written. Just frankly, I don't have time to wade through 2.5 hours worth of Dr. Flowers. Say it concisely, get it over with, and we'll try to listen to it, do our homework better. But I do know that I have listened to enough of what he's had to say that I think I know what he believes. And I think I can quite easily go back to some of the things that he's put on video, and I can point out when he said what he said. I've left copious comments on his videos, and he hasn't responded to any of them. I've asked him pointed questions. He hasn't responded to any of those. I've sent him emails offering to debate him, online debate or formal debate with a moderator. I don't care. I'll do either. And he simply hasn't responded to anything I've had to say. Maybe he doesn't think I'm worthwhile responding to. I don't know. But I just want to say they kind of accused me of being angry, that maybe I'd had the wrong position for 50 years and now I've seen the error of my way, and now I'm angry because blah blah blah. Well, that's not the case at all. I wasn't angry when I made the video. I was actually just having a good time joshing about some of the stuff that he says. I honestly think that many of the things that he says are just so far out to left field that they don't even really merit a response. And no one, I think, who really believes the scriptures would even think that he needed to be responded to. But I'm trying to respond to what he's having to say. I'd like to have a discussion with him. I left my email address on that video. Typically, when I make a video, I try to put a link to the video that I'm critiquing that he's made, and I'm not in a fancy studio. I don't have the ability to do all the bells and whistles that other people do. I'm down here in Costa Rica. Sometimes it's tough to even get these things uploaded because our internet is so bad. I certainly don't have the ability to put up on the screen things that he's said so that you can see exactly what he's saying just before I critique it. But, go back and look at what he said and find out if I'm misrepresenting him or not. It seems quite clear to me that what he's saying from many of the things that he said he's posted on YouTube, that he believes Calvinists think that God meticulously controls in the sense of causation. And I say that because there's a video fairly recently in which he talked about what glory is it if God knows where he's hidden all his robots and his puppets, and you almost get the impression when he says that he thinks that Calvinists believe that we are robots and puppets. I don't know how he can say things like that and think that we don't think that he thinks that we believe God is a puppeteer and we're nothing but puppets. Now, maybe I've completely and absolutely misunderstood him, and I would be most happy for him to respond to this and to tell me how else I should take that statement. How else am I supposed to understand him when he says that God has causally determined everything that occurs in the world, even the sin of sinners? And he argues against Calvinists that he thinks are saying that God puts pride in a person. He goes to that passage in 1 John, and I think completely misuses it, but he uses that to show that, no, God doesn't cause us to be proud. The pride is our responsibility. And I wholeheartedly agree with him, and so would every other real Calvinist who has ever lived. And that's why I laugh when he claims to have been a Calvinist at one time. And I've said it on other videos, just to give him the benefit of the doubt, maybe he fell in with a bunch of hyper-Calvinists who believe that God does indeed meticulously cause all of the sin that sinners are guilty of, and that sinners really have no responsibility for what they do because God is just manipulating them in a way that he causes them to sin, and he puts pride in their hearts, and he puts in their minds the desire to molest children and all the rest of that. Listen to what he says and tell me what I've misunderstood about what he's saying. If that isn't what he's saying, then I'm completely and absolutely misled by his words. Because in his words, it sounds as if he's saying he thinks that we believe that God meticulously causes, in the sense that we would cause a puppet to move or a robot to act, God meticulously causes everything that occurs in the world. And he quotes Piper. And, I don't disagree with Piper. I completely and absolutely agree with Piper on the issue of whether the bad things that happen, including child molestation, including rape, including murder, including the most horrendous things that we can imagine, are within the decree of a sovereign God. I agree that God brings things about according to his decree. And I believe that because I believe that's exactly what Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 11 is saying. Paul said, we have received an inheritance according to the purpose of him who works all things according to the counsel of his will. We have been predestined according to the purpose of him who works all things according to the counsel of his will. The word that Paul uses, translated works in our English version, is a word that means to effectively accomplish, energetically and effectively accomplish. That is, according to God's decree before the world began, God is bringing about everything that occurs. What we do not believe is that God necessarily brings about everything directly. Please understand that. We do not believe that God directly brings about everything that occurs in the sense of causing the evil that occurs. And the reason we don't believe that God must do that is because we believe, unlike Dr. Flowers, and I think this is really, if you boil all the fat out of it, I think this is really the issue that we need to talk about. And he states this quite categorically, and he's done so many, many, many times, and that is that God does not, we are not born in sin. We are not born with a disposition toward evil. And he says that even though the traditionalist statement that Dr. Eric Hankins wrote, I don't know if he has a PhD or if it's a doctor of ministries or whatever it is, but he's a doctor of something or another. And boy, you talk about just a bundle of contradiction. That statement is just about the biggest contradictory document I've ever seen. But even in that statement, he says, we believe that people are born inclined towards sin. And yet Dr. Flowers seems to deny that we are inclined towards sin. I don't know how you understand Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, that talks about all of us, including what we as believers were prior to our conversion. He really says we were no different at all from the rest of mankind that is continuing to live habitually in sin. Paul says we walked, and the word that is used for walked there refers to a continual action. We continued to walk in this way. This was habitual with us. This was our daily activity. We walked according to the course of this world. What direction does the course of this world go in? Is the course of this world inclined toward God, or is the course of this world inclined toward disobedience to God, rebellion against God? And I think the scriptures clearly teach that the course of this world is directly antithetical to God's revealed will. And yet we all, Paul says, we all walked, we had our conversation, our manner of life in concert with the world. We were walking according to the prince of the power of the air. We had chosen him, as it were, as our God. We had chosen to follow him instead of following God. We obeyed him. The spirit that now works in the children of disobedience, among whom, Paul says, we all had our manner of life in times past, fulfilling the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature the children of wrath. We were by nature, innately, that when Paul talks about the Gentiles doing by nature the things that are contained in or certain things that are contained in the law, he uses the same phrase. It is innate in us to do certain things we know to be right and not to do certain things we know to be wrong. We have that because we were made in God's image. Even though that image has been horribly marred and shattered, that image still remains, and we still know in our heart of hearts that there are certain things that are right and certain things that are wrong. We know that innately. We don't have to be taught it. Don't have to have the law of God tell us certain things are right, certain things are wrong. We know it by nature. That's the term that Paul uses here in Ephesians chapter 2 when he says we were by nature. That is, we were by birth the children of wrath, just like the rest. I don't know how you get away from that. I don't know how you understand any of Paul's teaching in the New Testament scriptures without understanding the in Adam, in Christ relationships. Both are representative in character. And if you don't understand that, it's impossible to understand the Pauline scheme of redemption. And so I think when you boil all the fat out of it, it really comes down to this whole idea of, are we indeed free in the sense that we have moral and spiritual freedom? I think there's no question about the fact that we are free in terms of rational ability, in terms of our consciences knowing what's right and what's wrong, even though they can be deceived and badly programmed and all the rest of that. But we have the ability to understand certain things. We have the natural ability to understand the gospel, for example. When Paul says you can't know the things of the Spirit of God, he doesn't mean you can't intellectually comprehend them. I think there are going to be people in hell that know the gospel very, very well, sometimes better than some seminary professors know the gospel. And yet they're going to perish. Paul doesn't teach that you can't know these things. And so we don't deny that sinners are able to make choices. We don't deny that. We aren't robots. We aren't automatons. And I think, as I say, to boil all the fat out of it, that's really what it comes down to. And Dr. Flower's argument always seems to be that can't be true because you wouldn't have any control over that. And I'm not sure I know what exegetical basis he has for saying that. I would like for him to present for us the exegetical basis upon which he makes the statement that it cannot be true that God has given us Adam's fallen nature because we would have no control over that. When he can come up with that exegetical basis, I'll be more than happy to entertain it and talk about it. So, Dr. Flowers, please respond to me and let me know on what exegetical basis you're saying that that can't be true because we would have no control over that. There are many things that are true over which we have no control whatsoever. And we could go through many of those in Scripture. I read in the Proverbs that the lot is cast into the lap. I mean, you roll the dice, and you don't have any control over how they're going to turn up, right? And yet the Scripture says the lot is cast into the lap, the whole disposing thereof is of the Lord. He is the one who is in control of all of this. I'm not in control of anything. And so to argue this can't be true because you wouldn't have any control over that is not, in my view, a legitimate argument. Perhaps you can show me how it is. But again, I think this is where it all comes down to. When we talk about free will as Calvinists, what we mean by that is that we're not robots. That is, we make our own decisions. I chose what I was going to eat for lunch. I didn't feel like God was forcing me to eat one thing and not eat another. I had some control over the amount of food that I ate and all the rest of that. I was able to make a rational choice. I chose what I deemed to be best. I rejected what I deemed not to be best. I had that ability. When we talk about Calvinists denying free will, that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the fact that we are bound in sin. We are controlled not by the Spirit of God, but we are controlled by the nature that we have inherited from Adam. Listen, Jesus said, "It is not that which goes into the mouth that defiles the man. It is that which comes out of the man that defiles the man. It is out of the heart that these things proceed." We don't become sinners when we sin. We sin because we're sinners. That, to me, seems to be the dividing line between what Dr. Flowers is saying and what we're saying. And so we're not denying that, sinners have free will in the sense that we make free, voluntary, and meaningful decisions that sometimes on the human level change the course of history. That's possible. There are people that have authority delegated to them under the sovereign umbrella of God. But no one in this realm is autonomous. And I know you sort of backpedaled on what you mean by autonomy in your video yesterday. But we simply don't possess autonomy in the sense that we are completely self-governing. All that we do is governed by God. Sometimes he governs us by permitting us to do certain things that we want to do contrary to his revealed will, and sometimes he governs us by restraining us and keeping us from doing the things that we want to do contrary to his revealed will, and sometimes he works in us both to will and to do for his good pleasure. He works in us that which is good and well-pleasing in his sight. The Scriptures clearly teach us that God does that. And to deny that, you simply have to deny the Scriptures. Yes, God gives us a new heart, a heart of flesh. He puts a new disposition within us. He puts his Spirit within us, and he causes us, the text tells us, to be obedient to his precepts. He causes us. Is that real obedience if God causes it? Well, it must be, because God seems to be pleased with it. I don't know how you deny that God is involved in bringing about, whether in permitting that which he has decreed, or in effectively causing something to occur. How you can deny that God is actively engaged in all of that, given what Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 11 says. Now I know you folks can come up with some reason why the text doesn't say what it says, but the text says what it says. He works all things according to the counsel of his will. What that means, of course, is that the counsel of his will must have existed before the outworking of all those things, and all of those things are directly being brought about by God in executing his decree. That's what the text says. What the text says in Romans chapter 8 and verse 28 is, we know that all things are working together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to his purpose. They're not just happening. God is working them out according to his purpose. And to impute to Piper the idea that he's saying that if a child is molested or a person is raped, that God put that thought into the person's heart, and that's what Calvinists believe, is to impute to Dr. Piper something that he is not intending to say. All he's saying is, I believe Ephesians 1:11. I believe that God is not letting the universe go and run helter-skelter apart from his control, but I believe that God is actively engaged in everything that happens so that he can bring good out of evil. And he intended to use it that way. It didn't just occur to him as an afterthought so that he could come along and redeem the bad stuff that happens. No, God intended for it to be in his world, or it would not have been in his world. When Paul talks about, and others talk about, God predestining that which occurs, they use the word proorizo. And the word proorizo was used at one point for drawing a boundary line beforehand. When we talk about God decreeing all that occurs, what we simply mean is that before God ever created anything, God decided to draw a boundary line between what he was going to allow to exist in his world or cause to exist in his world, and what he was going to keep outside of his world because he did not have a purpose for it being in his world. And so you have a clear demarcation between what God decided would happen in history and what God decided would not happen in history. That doesn't mean that God meticulously causes everything that happens in history. God didn't cause Judas to do what he did. It was Satan that put into his heart to betray the Lord. And yet God had determined that he was going to use that to accomplish his own purpose. It wasn't an afterthought. It wasn't that God said, whoops, Judas got out of line, so I better come in here and fix up the situation, try to redeem the mess that Judas has made by bringing about redemption. No. All of this was the plan of God from the beginning. God cannot have any sort of meaningful prophecy that is certain to come to pass apart from God having determined. He's not just looking through his telescope. I know Dr. Flowers doesn't like the corridors of time thing, but guess what? Guess where Calvinists got that? I've heard that from Arminian preachers since I was in knee pants. Here's how God elected. God looked down through the corridors of time. And I always wondered, what in the world are the corridors of time? I don't even know what the corridors of time are. But those Arminian guys said God looked down through the corridors of time. And he saw those who were going to believe and be obedient to the gospel. And he decided that he was going to choose them. I know that's not Dr. Flowers' position, but I'm just saying this is what they said. So if you don't like us using the term corridors of time, talk to your Arminian brothers, because they're the ones that are using the term. We never talked about corridors of time until we heard it from them. Sorry, but that's just the reality. I understand quite well that not all Calvinists, or though all who claim to be Calvinist, are Calvinist. You say there are different brands of Calvinist. I say no. There's only one brand of Calvinist, and those are the Calvinists that are in line with the confessions of faith and who are in line with the canons of Dort and so forth. The others might think they're Calvinist, but most of the time they will turn out to be hyper-Calvinist because they have gone beyond what Calvin and what other Calvinists have said. My problem with some of your representation of what we're saying, and I may have said this before, I'm getting old. You guessed my age. Thank you. You guessed a little younger than I actually am. I'll be 73 years old in November. But I may have forgotten that I said this before, so just gotta bear with me. There are two things that happen to you when you get older. One is that you just can't remember things quite as well as you did before, and I can't remember the second one. Anyway, don't lump us all together. We aren't all together. I understand that there are different brands of so-called Calvinists. I know that the Princeton theologians said things that were different from what other Calvinists said. There were Calvinists just before the modern missionary movement started who were not Calvinist at all, but were hyper-Calvinist. They opposed the whole idea of evangelism because if God wants to convert the heathen, he can do it without your help or mine. But that's not Calvinism. That's not what Calvinism says. Calvinism tells us that God uses means to accomplish his purpose. Calvinism tells us that God uses second causes to accomplish his purpose. Calvinism tells us that God does not infringe on the human will in accomplishing his decree. People do what we want to do. But in doing what we want to do, we are doing what God has decreed that we do because he intends to use it for his own glory and for our spiritual and eternal good. That's why this doctrine is so comforting. I can find no comfort in thinking that some of the horrible, horrible things that are occurring in the United States right now, contrary to the revealed will of God, the declared will of God, I can't take any comfort in thinking that this is just the result of free will. It's free will in the sense these people are doing what they want to do, and they're wreaking havoc with the nation. That I agree with. But I'm not in agreement with the idea that somehow this is outside the will of God and that God doesn't really have any control over this and God isn't really bringing this to pass so that he might bring about something better out of that, namely the declaration of his own will and the good of his people. I have trouble getting any comfort out of the whole idea that these people are just acting as autonomous agents. Are they autonomous in the sense that they're doing what they want to do? Are they guilty? Are they responsible? Absolutely. Are they culpable? And probably many of them deserve capital punishment for what they're doing. I'm not denying that. Are they doing that outside what God had determined before the world began would occur in his world? Absolutely not. Because if you say that, then we have an entire world and all of history that is filled with purposeless evil, out of which God does not intend to bring any good. And he's not the cosmic janitor that comes along after the party's over and just cleans up the mess and redeems the evil. No. He is the one who planned the party. He knew everything that was going to happen and determined that he was going to permit it to happen. You see, here's the difference between what Dr. Flowers is saying Calvin believed and what Calvin was actually saying. I went back and read that and read it in the context. And if you read that in the context where he says it isn't just permission, I absolutely agree with him. What he says in the context of what he wrote is that God does not simply permit the evil that occurs in his world. He has determined to permit it. It isn't bare permission. It is permission with a purpose. It is God deciding to permit it. That's the decree of God. All we mean by the decree of God is that God decided to do and to permit to be done what was going to happen. That's all we mean. You can't get causal determinism out of that, in the sense that what God decreed causes us to act the way we act. Except for the fact, of course, that yes, we do what we do because we are who we are. But do you really think you could have done better than Adam did in the garden? Do you really think that you aren't inclined toward evil, but for some reason, when you're confronted with a moral choice, you're certain to commit evil? If you believe your traditional statement, that's what you've said. How can you have free will and at the same time be certain to sin when confronted with a moral choice? That ain't free will, my friend. If you have free will, then you could have acted other than you did, and it isn't certain that you would have committed the moral evil. That's just reality. You can't have it both ways. You can't talk about free will and certainty at the same time. Can't happen in the sense that you're using free will. In the sense that we're using free will, yes, but not in the sense that you're using free will. So I think I'd love to get together with you. Let's talk on camera. You know, you want to try to embarrass me again? I think you probably thought you were doing that in your last video. I'm up for that. I'll be happy to discuss this stuff with you. Because I don't really think you understand, number one, what Calvinists believe, and I don't think you understand what Piper was saying. Piper very clearly, in many places, has said when these bad things happen, God hates them. God hates them. They're contrary to his revealed will. God hates them. And so it's incomprehensible that you would think that he's saying almost in the same breath, but when they happen, they're happening because God brings them about for the good of his people. We don't understand how it can be for the good of his people. I don't understand how God's judgments work and how his ways work. They're incomprehensible. But I simply believe what the Scripture says, and I would urge you to converse with me. Don't ignore me, please. Let's talk about it. I think it'd be helpful to both audiences. I'd love to see us coming together for a meeting of the minds. I don't want to cause division. That is never my purpose in anything that I say or do. I want us to have a meaningful discussion. I will stand shoulder to shoulder with you against hyper-Calvinism. I'll stand shoulder to shoulder with you against anyone who says the work of Christ is not sufficient for the salvation of any and every sinner who believes. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not a four-point Calvinist, never been a four-point Calvinist. I have opposed four-point Calvinism, never has made any sense to me. But I do believe what the canons of Dort have to say about the work of Christ. And I'm going to talk about that in the next video, Lord willing, assuming I live to tomorrow. And we'll talk a little bit about what's wrong with limited atonement. Well, I hope this has been helpful to you. Dr. Flowers, please contact me. I left my email address on that last video. So please contact me, and love to talk to you. And also to Dr. Wagner about these issues, because I think it's important that we continue to work together to try to bring about unity, not by simply saying, well, let's just agree to disagree, but by working through our disagreements and saying, you know what, I thought you believed this, but now I'm understanding you didn't believe this. So let's work together to come to some sort of meeting of the minds on these issues. Well, I hope it's helpful. Until next time, may the Lord richly bless you.